Oh, okay.
Did I talk over someone?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right, great. So as Kate suggested yesterday, we can look straight onto people's bios. So I'm going to let them do their own introduction if they want. And I have Matt as our first, and I'm just going to stick with that order unless you guys want to fight about it. Matt, you're muted.
Uh-oh.
Where's the bio at on? Is it on the app? I don't know. When I was looking at
It's
profile.
on the Hoover app.
Yeah, on
Okay, so
Hoover, you can click on the speaker name.
Okay, so let me go ahead and do this. Just
and there's a view profile option
so
for everyone.
let me see. So messages. What's the tab? Oh, so home. I'm looking for my profile. Let me hit my profile button. Where's it?
Matt, you shouldn't have to look up your own profile to tell us who you are.
It just feels weird to talk about myself in first person. I'm so used to being Bob Dole. I just introduced myself, but whatever. So my name is Matt Snyder. I did my PhD at UC Riverside in the English department. I work in the university writing program. As of now, I'm a continuing lecturer there. And I co-founded an organization called the 28ers to get money out of politics. And I'm also the co-host of a podcast about designing utopia called thefutureisamixtape.com. I'll put it in the notes. And so those are my intellectual projects. And my paper is going to be exploring and discussing the unheralded and really important science fiction short story by E.M. Forster called The Machine Stops. And I'll play a clip and you'll probably figure out why I'm doing that. So let me go ahead and play the short clip and I'll go ahead and start my paper without ado. So let me go ahead and get the share button going. You have to remember to hit that little sound button on the corner, right? And so I will go ahead and let's see right here. I think that's what it is. Okay, so let me make sure. Okay, now that's in, let me have to move this around. Okay, wait a second. How do I move this? There we go. It's making some issues for me right now. It's like, there we go. There we go. So let me move this. I have to keep moving these bars around. All right, so this is a clip from Wall-E.
Over to the driving range and hit a few virtual balls into space.
Now we did that yesterday. I don't want to do that.
Well then,
I have to get the screen blown up. This wasn't popping up. Here we go.
what do you want to do?
I don't know. Something.
Wow.
Make a place scream.
No, it doesn't sound.
Look, I'm tired of it.
If you can't fold the straw, the episode isn't any good.
What?
Over here.
Whoa.
Hello? Tunnel. I'm in a tunnel. I can't hear you.
There you are.
By and large, everything you need to be happy. Your day is very important to us.
Hey, drink the bus. Here, take the cup. Hey, take the cup. Ah!
Please remain stationary. A service bot will be here to assist you momentarily.
Stewards? Hello?
Please remain stationary. A service bot will be here to assist you momentarily.
What's that? What's going on? John?
Eva?
No. John.
Eva?
Hi, Wally.
A is for Axiom, your home sweet home. B is for by and large, your very best friend.
Time for lunch. In a cup. Feel beautiful.
Stunning. I know, honey. Men.
Attention, Axiom shoppers. Try blue. It's the new red.
Ooh.
Don't get me started on the date. Every holiday I have been on has been a virtual disaster. If I had one who wasn't so official, you know. There are good men out there. Well, I know because I've screwed a bit up. What the? Huh? Mary? Huh? Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Shade.
Right, that's a clip of the human dystopia. In the YouTube clip, it says, this is what we're going down toward into 2011. So I'll go ahead and read the paper inspired by that clip, and then also pivot to a discussion on, whoops, let me go ahead and hit this escape button, get back to my text. Released on June 27, 2008, Pixar's WALL-E popped off in the Cinemaplex with an extreme level of FOMO and hit a two-run home run in the process. The movie critics and Sinise immediately cited as one of the best films of the year, and American moviegoers as well as the global viewers flocked to see it, gorging on popcorn and soda, telling each other this was a true example of event cinema for kids and adults, children optional. Pixar had a reason to celebrate, but also to worry. At $180 million, WALL-E was the most expensive animated film ever produced. Yet it still managed to be a wild success while making $521 million, basically $500 million, with 57% of that coming from foreign audience. As such, Pixar had arrived, and so did its director, Andrew Stanton, becoming widely known as a public figure, not something typically accepted as a common expectation in Hollywood with the carousing celebrity egos of Spielberg, Scorsese, and Coppola. This miraculous visual triumph was in rapid succession compared to classic films like 2001: Space Odyssey and Blade Runner, and this signaled not only the full arrival of this animation company on par with Hayao Miyazaki's Ghibli studio, but it also burst like a flare from one's hand as an increasingly brutalist version of SF tales where technology had run amok. While WALL-E mimics so much of the increasingly dystopian elements of adult SF that was now sinking into young adult territory at the dawn of the new millennium, it did march past much of these adult tales in one clear respect. As bleak as 3/4 of the movie is from its onset, WALL-E is a dystopian sci-fi epic with an unambiguously happy ending. Exactly 14 days from this Pixar release was another release that would have a wider, richer, weirder, and more despotic influence on us all, the July 11th release of iPhone, the second generation of which was widely seen as a far more affordable and less erratic than its first iteration the year prior. Pixar had gone global and mainstream, but so had Apple's first smartphone. The body horror envisioned in WALL-E, where humans had lost contact with their bodies and those around them, staring into their holographic screens, were matched in the seemingly bizarre world of the portable internet at our fingertips with the Apple iPhone. Suddenly, within a year, we were all living on our phones, losing touch with magnolias, blue jays, and the wind lapping through the leaves to hear our fingernails instead glittering on glass, hitting the refresh buttons in a sight of the soul that had stopped seeing. The sociologist and scholar Marisoldo points out that the dependence on the machine has narrowed down love and minimized human interaction. She argues that technology is eliminating face-to-face communication and more. We live in a world where the average person uses their cell phone 2,617 times a day. So it's no wonder interpersonal communication has become a rarity. And she's, of course, talking about picking it up that many times in a day. In essence, we've become walled in by our own WALL-Es. Both upon the initial release and later analysis of the legendary Pixar film, critics have noted the film's debt to such science fiction classics as mentioned before, 2001: Space Odyssey, but also Nick Park's wacky claymation escapade, A Grand Day Out. But the Pixar film's most thoroughly worked out allusion to a somewhat obscure short story by E.M. Forster has so far gone unnoticed among critics. Well known among science fiction mavens, the 1909 E.M. Forster short story, The Machine Stops, and as you might know, E.M. Forster is famous as part of the Bloomsbury group and the modernist group, having written Passage to India. He did his only science fiction short story in his career called The Machine Stops. And it's famous for its vision of eco-catastrophe and for its premonitory description of a system of worldwide media not unlike the internet. As in Wall-E, The Machine Stops is set on the future Earth, whose surface has been blasted in inhabitability by waste and pollution. Writing when the radio was in its infancy and at the dawn of industrialization, Forster, best known for his novel That Passage Into, imagined that an intermediated hyper-civilization in which people connect with one another through electronic screens. And this is the kind of first imagining of video conferencing. Samsung defended itself from Apple on the iPads using 2001 Space Odyssey. Well, video conferencing is really done in the very first time in literature in this short story, or really novella or novelette. And this video conferencing dystopia, unnervingly reminiscent of today's social media. While Wall-E's human population has escaped into space, in Forster's tales, they have created a vast subterranean civilization. In both stories, however, humanity has grown fat and sessile thanks to automated systems that serve their every need. Whisked from screen to screen in automated chairs, they're unable to interact with the world without electronic mediation in front of them. And in both stories, the systems break down. The 1990 publication of Forster's The Machine Stops, like much of science fiction before and after, was obsessed by notions of extrapolation and future imaginings. But unlike Jules Verne and H.G. Wells' vast utopian washes on word canvases, Forster's anxiety about the dawn of the Industrial Revolution can be seen as an anxious rebuke to the kinds of techno-optimism the Forster writers were hawking to the masses, save for H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, where the Molochs live underground and are dirty and discolored, and the happy 1% live above, called the Eloi. And here, he's messing it where we're all one class, but we're all a class that's afraid of nature. Forster's very necessary and troubling concerns with technology, who owns it, and for what purpose its use, spoke with a greater clairvoyance than even Aldous Huxley's almost as prophetic text, Brave New World, published in 1931, which saw how technology would control through its hydra-headed pleasures like floating, puffing soma. But when even Huxley failed to see was the body horror implications of technology and its ability to annihilate our relationship to the biosphere. As such, The Machine Stops not only remains the most unsettling and prophetic work of science fiction in the 20th century, but with the onslaught of COVID, it has also taken on towering powers as a 21st century allegory for the lasting effects of this global pandemic with COVID, which has shredded human consciousness by way of the pre-apocalypse. COVID has fast-tracked new horrors on humanity's consumer pleasure domes and the bodies that inhabit them, as these horrors and to ourselves become a sordid relationship to nature. What had been transmuted and transcribed as an allegory of isolation, of the machine taking over human touch and physical presence. The Machine Stops saw farther and faster toward the future, where even William Gibson's Neuromancer, released in 1984 and often tagged with heavy post-it notes, as a dreamcaster text for the dawn of the internet and cyberpunk altogether. And with the birth of smartphones and then tablets, The Machine Stops influence has proven to take on newer meanings, dimensions as an allegory. So much so that the ghostly fingerprints of this science fiction story and its ideas were etched into the most dazzling and poetic mundane moments of Pixar's Wall-E. Now, with the age of global pandemics upon us, COVID will be one of the many. In the terrifying climate wind of the UN's IPCC report, which gives us 10 years to cut carbon emissions by 50%, The Machine Stops' underground world of flesh-rotting chairs and the honeycomb homes speaks to the fear of our own bodies and the surface world and the horrors that lie between, the specters of other lives that live above us and might supersede us. While E.M. Forster's Machine Stops advocates that dependency on technology will destroy humanity and break the machine, a man-made creation with the potential of controlling humans is seen as a symbol of success at bringing humanity back to the surface of the earth. The story's charged allegory with the absent focus on the balance between technology and nature, as well as the availability of resources with minimal human labor. The allegory just flips for a different type of tyranny, a slavish devotion to nature, while instead a man-made creation should serve us and not the other way around. Despite living in the underground, a place with a lot of resource availability, Kuno, the son and the father-mother narrative, acts like a revolutionary, a nature-first extremist, and ensures to find a way out of the underground and reach the surface. E.M. Forster used the word underground to imply that the underground is inferior to the above ground. The author uses diction to show that Kuno, one of the protagonists, lives in an inferior world that needs to be destroyed to bring humanity back. Kuno's mother, Vashti, who lives halfway across the world, also underground, prefers social distancing and giving her online lecture of music during the Australian period to an unseen armchair audience who lap up abstract historical information that has absolutely no relevance to their actual subterranean lives beyond being an illusory distraction from their hollowed out existence, not dissimilar to college lectures under lockdown. So, know your alienation. I once called teaching online as fully automated Marxist alienation. In order to prove that depending on the machine destroys humanity, E.M. Forster chose to place Kuno, a free spirit that is always questioning life underground with full control of the dependency on the machine, in the underground. It is clear that Kuno advocates for the return of humanity and the nature of humankind when he explains to the mother, we created the machine to do our will, but we cannot make it do our will now. It has robbed us of that sense of space, and in that sense of touch, it has blurred every human relation and narrowed down love to a carnal act. It has paralyzed our bodies, our wills, and now it compels us to worship it. Kuno makes the claim that humans created the machine in the purpose of proving humankind and allowing that man-made creation to rule over the human race can be in fact dangerous. Kuno appears as much of an anarchist primitivist as one and another, and an eco-fascist in another gaze. Kuno makes a negative correlation between the control of the machine and human interaction as he suggests that humans are serving man-made creation. However, Kuno's thoughts can lead us to another tyranny, this slavish devotion to nature, right? Which we cannot return back to in the ways that Kuno imagines. Even though Kuno is in favor of breaking the machine and returning to the nature of humanity, Vashti, his mother, in counterclockwise fashion, is a technology-first extremist. Appears to be an American consumer, first world consumer, who truly believes in the machine's every word and doing. Vashti is an archetype of the status quo conformist with a soldier mentality rather than a scout mentality. Despite living in the underground, human interaction is where it's minimal. Vashti seems to worship the idea of the machine without knowing the machine, what the machine really is and represents, and how they do not own it. E.M. Forster created Vashti as a protagonist to show the audience that many modern citizens are willing to worship a man-made creation instead of using the machine for their own favor and for their own sovereignty. And this reliance on algorithms that we see currently with computer technology is part of this, especially in the age of COVID. E.M. Forster shows that Vashti fears losing the machine, as he states, then half ashamed, half joyful, she murmured, "Oh, machine, machine," and raised the volume to her lips. Thrice she kissed it, thrice she inclined her head, thrice she felt the delirium of acquiescence, symbolizing, in this case, when man starts serving the machine, man starts to worship it. It is by no accident that E.M. Forster aimed to show that the book of the machine, where all of the instructions on how to live and operate in the machine are rules over Vashti. It is clear that Vashti fears and worships the machine when she calls out the machine, "Oh machine, oh machine," very similar to many individuals in our society that call out for their God in regards to their actions. Though Vashti's willingness to be controlled by humankind's creation relates to the machine stops, it is also relatable to our world today. Vashti represents a follower citizen that is willing to serve technology instead of the other way around. The algorithms are racing us as the ponies. E.M. Forster supports this claim by showing that Vashti is blind from reality and is fully convinced that the machine provides for mankind, while reality is that man created the machine. Modern citizens like Vashti deny that humankind should not worship the machine, but instead they believe that the man belongs to the machine. In fact, Vashti and Kuno are two very dangerous archetypes in E.M. Forster's narrative because they offer simplistic solutions to a complex allegory instead of a balanced solution of what is needed. A creation will always be the creation of its creator. To borrow the former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis expression, the machine is the dawn of what he calls techno-feudalism, where this form of surveillance capitalism not only owns most of the commons, but has privatized our brains and lives rent-free, sleeping in our neuron pathways. And a perfect example of this is Amazon is not just the marketplace, it is the only market. It chooses what the seller sets their price, and Amazon through algorithms will actually hide the searches for what you're looking for. It narrows and opens what you can see or not see. So this is why we call it techno-feudalism. E.M. Forster creates an ending to the machine stops that symbolizes one potential fate for humanity. The story focuses on the breaking of the machine, the evil techno-capitalism, where it is only hope, as Kuno describes, for humanity to survive alongside nature as its only holding device. The machine has overpowered humans, and now the roles are reversed. Humans serve the machine. This is clearly seen when Kuno mentions to his mother not to worry and always have hope for humanity. Vashti asks Kuno, "Oh, tomorrow some fool will start the machine again. Tomorrow." "Never," Kuno said. "Never. Humanity has learned its lessons." And you can see this influence from this in what's called the Butlerian Jihad in Frank Herbert's book Dune, where AI gets so out of control they decide to never bring it back and create human machines. So if you've seen either of the movies or read the books, you know this is another way in which this short story has influenced science fiction literature. The be-all of all novels in science fiction, Dune, which is very much a corollary to Lord of the Rings, and its influence is even set in that text. So this is by no means accident that E.M. Forster shows that depending on technology is a mistake of the past, and humanity could never make such a mistake again. E.M. Forster describes the fall under the underground like a broken honeycomb, suggesting that with technology's rule, the world underground is a strict structure with one person cells giving no freedom, no space for humankind. A bee collapse that must fall in on its mouth to reform a new paradigm. The allegory describes the world underground gained in its freedom only when the machine was broken and when humans started to make it to the surface or above ground. Breaking the machine has allowed humanity to survive as a world slowly shifting from above ground where the machine was non-existent. Even though many revolutionary free spirits such as Kuno might argue for the only way for humanity to survive is when the machine is destroyed, others might argue that the machine could actually benefit human race only when it serves humans and not the other way around. Kuno is an archetype that is dangerous as Vashti, and both will offer a simplistic solution to complex decisions, thus instead of a more balanced solution which is needed. Murray Bookchin, the social anarchist and theorist of the 20th century, believed that the most effective humanity would be when they have direct and deep democracy where nature and technology are in balance. This combination of Vashti's idea as well as Kuno's making a balanced solution, which is in fact more effective than the ideas of Vashti and Kuno that lead to another tyranny alone, set aside from each other. Bookchin goes on to underline that and demarcate that another world is truly possible, as he states in his great nonfiction work, Post-Scarcity Anarchism. One of the most effective means of increasing output, in fact, has been the continual reorganization of the labor process, extending and sophisticating the division of labor to make way for direct democracy. We see in all of places from a yogurt commercial, and this is only a minute clip, I'm getting to the end of my talk here, by Chobani. And this is remarkable that we have absolutely no utopian cinema, but here we have a commercial by a yogurt company imagining a positive utopia. And I'll do a share screen one more time for this 1 minute clip. And this is the only utopian film I've seen. So, if you're asking for utopian cinema, here it is. It's a yogurt commercial. So let me go ahead and do this yogurt commercial. Okay, I'm going to hit the share button, and I got the audio on. Here we go. Okay, so dear Alice.
Dear Alice, this place is yours now. It's a handful, but nothing worth doing is easy. The land is more than just dirt. If you look after it, it will feed you forever. You're a smart one. I know you'll be okay come rain or shine. And remember, a business is only as good as its people, so treat them well. Our job is to plant seeds so our grandkids get to enjoy the fruit. So, eat well, Alice, and keep planting those seeds. Because how we eat today feeds tomorrow.
There you go. There's your utopian cinema. Where the fuck is the rest of the movies? Where is that in the movie theater, right? Once again. So let's go back to this and talk about it. It's both very gripping and sad that that's the text that we have for utopian cinema. So this is what we need, a utopian cinema from Hollywood, one that dares to dream our way out of the endless and terminal dystopias that make us feel better about the dystopia we currently live in. And while Edward Bellamy's utopian novel Looking Backward from 1887 seems dated and dangerously naive, much as the case with E.M. Forster's groundbreaking work of science fiction, given what we know of the hyper-centralized state socialism, it has still created a wild flowering of discussion about socialism and utopia in a spate of satires, celebrations, and extensions of ideas. It even influenced Eugene Debs' vision of socialism, who then influenced FDR's New Deal policies with the effects of the Communist Party on his neck. And it generated the first real wave of excitement about socialism and utopia in the US. For much better visions of a future possible, we only need to look at the holy trinity of utopian SF novels that came far after Looking Backward at the end of the countercultural 1960s, and which Hollywood is too fearful or dumb to make. Aldous Huxley's utopian novel at the end of his life when he's dying from throat cancer, Island, published in 1962, Ursula K. Le Guin's glorious and gorgeous The Dispossessed, 1974, and Marge Piercy's The Women on the Edge of Time, 1976. If those novels seem too old and fuddy-duddy, there are plenty of anti-utopian novels by Kim Stanley Robinson, Ministry of Future, just recently published, or their pre-apocalyptic utopias, Cory Doctorow's Walkaway comes to mind as well, published in 2017, that both deserve to put a shine on the world and make it glow again with furtive potentials. We don't need any more Star Wars lightsaber sequences, more than we need of Picard's random misadventures on holodecks. The author G.F. Ryman and others have said as much with the movement of mundane SF, where ideas of the oncoming deserve our attention in the now. This Earth can be saved, at least in this neck of the multiverse. And if we can't save this Earth, why even bother trying somewhere else with demands and outcomes far beyond the bizarre and frightening, like Elon Musk's childhood masturbations with terraforming Mars? Murray Bookchin, an anarchist, once said, the assumption that currently exists must necessarily exist is the acid that corrodes all visionary thinking. A century earlier to Bookchin's utopian dreaming with his glorious and gorgeous masterwork, Ecology of Freedom, the queer Irish playwright Oscar Wilde once said, a map of the world that does not include utopia is not even worth glancing at, for it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing. And when humanity lands there, it looks out and seeing a better country sets sail. Progress is the realization of utopias. Trapped under the dystopian rubble of empire, where our climate chaos has become colonialism's final form, we deserve all the light that glimmers above us, and so we must reach for it. But right now, there's no planet B. It will take every one of us, not just the lone logical Spock, to repair our ship's precious and damaged warp drive. Once fixed by our many hands, all of the stars, both seen and unseen, will beckon to us with open smiles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. We're going to hold questions to the end. I didn't mention that at the beginning, but we will. So we are then on to our next, if you are ready.
Is that me? I think it's me.
That is you.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. So introduce myself first, I guess you said? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Marina Matlock. I'm a PhD candidate at The Ohio State University. I'm pretty much nearing the end of my dissertation, so that's very exciting. Hoping to maybe defend next semester, we'll see. And I study representations of the child and constructions of femininity within Victorian and Neo-Victorian cultures, including sometimes some Disney studies. So I was kind of excited about the Wall-E Pixar part of the last presentation. And so this paper that I'm going to be presenting today is called The Blot is the Life, Vampirically Inking or Drinking Up the Body of an Aztec in Dickens's Bleak House. So let me get my timer going so I don't go over time. Okay. In its portrayal of pestilential fog and corrupted blood, of fairy tale princesses and grotesque goblins, in its concomitant emanations of hypnotic allure and of repulsive effluvia, and in its exhibition of predatory parents exploiting the faculties of their progeny, and of a charnel chancery attending to the will of the dead over the want of the living, it is small wonder that traces of the vampire have been so frequently exhumed from among the pages of Charles Dickens's Bleak House. Indeed, as Monica Reidiger Smith notes, quote, the fictional paradigm of human subject eating and human object eaten surfaces wherever inequities exist as a way of alerting readers to the largely unacknowledged fact that structures of power are not innocent and not free from perpetuating forms of social cruelty. Such anatomies of power pervade a text suffused by hegemonies of gender, class, age, race, nationality, and institution, wherein, quote, there is not an atom nor a cubic inch of London's pestilential gas, but shall work its retribution through every order of society, up to the proudest of the proud and to the highest of the high. And yet, while critics like Carol Senft point to the Voltairean vampiric fueling modernity's enterprise and to the Engelian fiend capitalizing on industry's privilege, while they claim that the Dickensian atmosphere is one of exploitative engorgement, peopled with a horrible assortment of predatory individuals and decadent institutions, while they decry this cannibalization of the innocent in the world's gradual evolution toward death, what all this discourse about the supposedly self-evident vampire motif fails to account for is, in fact, the mechanism of consumption itself. It's one thing to note that Richard Carstone's life has been leached away by the Court of Chancery and its anthropophagic agents until he is, quote, quite destitute of color, and quite another to anatomize how. For if indeed the vampires of Bleak House operate as a significant metaphor for destructive human behavior, we should not be content with a figurative spectrality glossing literal toothlessness and dearth of blood. In fact, closer inspection of the vampire motif reveals that just as Dickens himself includes a lengthy treatise on vampires and ghouls in an 1871 issue of Household Words, so too are Bleak House's vampires housed not only in the text, but in text, embodied by and consumers of the written hand. The exchange of an exoticized Gothic predicated on enigmatic cartographies for one localized on a decidedly English topography, notes Alan Pritchard, quote, grows out of Dickens's perception that the remote and isolated country mansion or castle is not so much the setting of ruin and darkness, mystery and horror as the great modern city. The Gothic horrors are here and now. Thus, as Dickens, quote, purposefully dwells upon the romantic side of familiar things, London is rendered as a city of the noxious night. Fetid and foreboding putrefaction saturates the city in its nightmarish pall, and it is a moot point whether squalid districts like Tom All Alone's be uglier by day or by night, when incubi fail to dissipate with the rising of the sun, but are rather shown to be part of a dreadful diurnal reality, wherein quotidian horrors threaten to eclipse the Stygian. Consequently, the only figures in Bleak House to be directly identified as vampires are, in fact, professional monsters, appendages, hands of the arm of the monstrous Court of Chancery, the, quote, hungry-eyed lawyer Voles, and, quote, parched-lipped crook, owner of the rag and bottle shop and effigy of the Lord Chancellor. Indeed, Voles's professional appetite is the family business of, quote, man-eating, and there is, quote, something of the vampire in him and in his lifeless manner. That Voles, who, quote, always looks at his clients as if he were making a lingering meal of them, is moreover equipped with a desk that sounds as hollow as a coffin, not only associates his death with his work, with the necrotic paraphernalia of Chancery, but allies his monstrosity to the epistolary. Voles, notes Senft, is a parasite who eventually destroys the weak-willed and susceptible Richard Carstone, not by literally sucking Richard's blood, but by encouraging him to believe in a successful outcome to the Chancery suit. That is, by emboldening Richard to invest himself, monetarily and otherwise, in a tenebrous patrimony. It is therefore no coincidence that Voles feeds on Richard, abbreviating his life precisely as he swallows up his patronymic. Only in the mouth of the vampiric Voles is the name of Carstone gulped down into the truncated Mr. C. The epistolary hands and consequent graphophagic consumption that characterize Voles's cannibalism are also manifest in Crook, who likewise is a vampire in and of hands. Crook spreads his own lean hands out above the body of Captain Hawdon like a vampire's wings, in an act that is both predacious and proprietorial. Moreover, the illiterate Crook is a rapacious collector of textual bodies, of characters, both epistolary and graphic, as much as he is of those characters' corporeal detritus. One had only to fancy, reports Esther, that yonder bones in a corner, piled together and picked very clean, were the bones of clients. In Crook's profound yet voracious illiteracy, there is a crass, quasi-animalistic, quote, smacking of lips with the unction of a horrible interest, to consume so as to possess, a monomania with him to think he is possessed of documents, on the chance that those dismembered hands are worth something, and may therefore become a source of power. Throughout Bleak House, and particularly in reference to Lady Deadlock and Captain Hawdon, it is intimated that the self is inscribed by and in the hand. Consequently, the pursuit of metonymical hands enacts an appropriation of bodies, a handing over of authority, power, and vital energy. Thus, in quarrying the figure of Lady Deadlock, in that is pursuing the narrow track of red blood and red blot, Inspector Bucket desires to possess her entire story, craves more localized authority over the individual. Indeed, Peter Toms notes that Bucket, much like the cannibalistic voles and crook, nourishes himself upon the subjects of his investigation and is veritably invigorated by figuratively writing, even ingesting the track of blood. The very act of tracing a narrative so as to possess the private identity of another is similarly emblematized in the, quote, ravenous little pens of the chroniclers who satiate the public's demand for private lives made comestible stories. With, quote, her name in these many mouths and her shame published, Lady Deadlock knows herself masticated, devoured, and ontologically dispossessed. Hence, Lady Deadlock is made the ultimate cannibalized text, a dismembered body whose written hand, corporeal body, and even borrowed handkerchief are read by detectives, lawyers, crossing sweeps, and even the reader, who registers in the depiction of Lady Deadlock's Galaxy Gallery portrait a reflection of the way in which she is butchered by and subsequently consumed in fiction. Quote, Mr. Guppy affects to smile, and with the view of changing the conversation, looks with admiration, real or pretended, round the room at the Galaxy Gallery of British Beauty, terminating his survey with the portrait of Lady Deadlock over the mantel shelf, in which she is represented on a terrace, with a pedestal upon the terrace, and a vase upon the pedestal, and her shawl upon the vase, and a prodigious piece of fur upon the shawl, and her arm on the prodigious piece of fur, and a bracelet on her arm. Detail upon detail, limb upon limb, Lady Deadlock's body is incorporated as a body of text and syntactic accrual of dismembered units. In the perusal of any novel, it is suggested we are akin to Crook in reading and thereby consuming our own piles of dismembered bodies. Indeed, anecdotes pertaining to Lady Deadlock are prefaced with such universalizing banalities as the story goes, or once upon a time, prosaicisms that invite the reader to drain Lady Deadlock of her individuality and vampirize her self-possession. It is poetic, perhaps, that while Lady Deadlock lives buried by and within such fairy tales, her daughter seems born from them. While elsewhere figurative hands are figuratively consumed in vampiric expropriation, the remembering of self enacted in the fairy tales and allegories imposed upon and rewritten for Lady Deadlock and Esther Summerson represents a perversely etic ordering that is as consuming as it is contaminating. Thus, as far as Esther knows, she is conceived as a blot. Quote, the writer who had bred her in secrecy from her birth had blotted out all trace of her existence. And if the writer were to die before the child became a woman, she would be left entirely friendless, nameless, and unknown. As though she were a palimpsest, Esther has her very bloodline effaced by a blot line, and accordingly has her own character veritably rewritten for her. Further, in stating that your mother, Esther, is your disgrace and you were hers, the godmother reads Esther as the sign and embodiment of sin, even as a clue that must be carefully hidden, that disembodies Esther's actual identity. As a consequence, Esther perceives that she is a hollowed no one, or a fractured, quote, princess from the fairy stories, not only charming, guilty, and yet innocent, all the disordered symptoms of Puranic exploitation of her core identity that Esther subsequently seeks to heal and conforming ever more to her proscribed and thus scripted roles. Hence, when Jarndyce and others rechristen Esther as Old Woman and Little Old Woman and Cobweb and Mrs. Shipton and Mother Hubbard and Dame Durden and so many other names of that sort, Esther's own name soon becomes quite lost among them. However, while Senf suggests that the names that Esther is given point both to her willingness to work for the future and to her femininity, what the names actually enact is further existential erasure of Esther's narrative of self, a supplantation of one imposed hand for another, that is, a blot transfusion. In alluding to tropes and archetypes, Jarndyce allows, and perhaps even encourages, fairy tale signs to usurp Esther's identity, to identify and control her, in other words, to deny her independence and privacy, and subject her to external definitions. Such parasitic evisceration is, of course, redolent of Mrs. Pardiggle and her, quote, mechanical way of taking possession of people. As J. Ellis Miller has it, to give someone a nickname is to force on her a metaphorical translation and to appropriate her to oneself, not unlike the vampire's faculties from mesmeric command. Thusly drained and transfixed, rescripted as a force of order within Bleak House, its housekeeper and its keeper of keys, Esther is ordered and imprisoned within the vampiric system of which she is vessel. Far from symbolizing in their imagery of containment and systematic regularity her narrative function as the sponsor of a world insulated from the disruptive processes of fantasy, Esther's inventories of each little storeroom drawer and cupboard and her administration of jams and pickles and preserves and bottles rather symbolize not her sponsoring of containment, but her containment itself. Esther's ordering influence is thus not a reflection of her own goodness, but rather vampirically of what stands behind her and all around, the monstrous system at the novel's heart, the one that lives by its monotonous disorder, and the one to which Esther and Tulkinghorn both share a set of keys. However, within the Jellyby home and beyond her own cupboarded chambers, Esther's keys are ultimately as ineffectual as the chambers of Chancery themselves. Inevitably redolent of Bluebeard's accursed keys, Esther's keys not only further inscribe her into limiting fairy tale, but jangle like the shackles of an imprisoning, quote, duty with a capital D. I felt that I was choking again, confesses Esther, but I gave the housekeeping keys the least shake in the world and looked at him quietly. The man at whom Esther looks is one who requests that Esther call him guardian, a man who remains guardian throughout his brief betrothal to Esther, and who is therefore evocative of the warden husband figure Esther already knows so well, and even already associates with Jarndyce. Well, guardian, she says at one point, without thinking myself a Fatima or you a Bluebeard, I am a little curious. In the fairy story, the vampiric Bluebeard bestows upon his curious bride a key bloodied by a macabre history of femicide. The key here is similarly debased by the very hand that ties Esther's keys to Crook's collection of locks, and that therefore insinuates Esther's ordered housekeeping within the rusty maw of the disordered court. And yet, if as Pritchard notes, quote, it is part of the tradition too that the victim, who like Esther drained of essence, drained of blood, becomes a predatory vampire himself, as Richard does in his relations with Ada and others, then what of Esther and what of the hand with which she writes? It seems so curious to me to be obliged to write all this about myself, Esther exclaims early on in her narrative, as if this narrative were the narrative of my life, but my little body will soon fall into the background now. And yet it doesn't. Esther's body, in fact, is persistently foregrounded, whether as a mirror of her mother's aspect, as a textual vessel appropriated by others, as a ghostly trace upon a haunted promenade, or as a marked surface delineating the path of illness. However, Esther's understanding of the primacy of her body as corporeal entity in semantic text is cultivated only when she excavates her figure from its background, only when Esther returns to herself revenant-like and removes the veil that has been her dark shroud in what can only be described as a chthonic rebirth. From a dark lake that seems one long night, Esther decrypts herself, laboring up colossal staircases, ever striving to reach the top and ever turning as she has seen a worm in a garden path, climbing toward a sky she never quite reaches. Moreover, in the aftermath of her illness, Esther has never been so visionary as a consequence of having been rendered briefly blind. In her repose at Boythorn's house near Chesney Wold, Esther recognizes the, quote, dreadful truth in the legend of the Ghost's Walk, that it was she who was haunting it even then. In recognizing her body as a ghostly trace, that is, in developing both an ontological and hauntological awareness of the specter she has become in others' fairy tales and ghost stories, Esther discerns the spectral nature that is writing itself, and in which all authors are complicit. Thus, Esther is able to overcome the guilt that has been handed down to her and inscribed by so many hands upon her, to exercise herself as ghost, while simultaneously vanquishing the anxiety of authority that keeps her from writing the self she fears may be fundamentally guilty. Haunted no longer, Esther begins to deliberately incorporate her authority over readings of her body. Nevertheless, Esther's assumption of authorial privilege is not transcendentally liberating, or for that matter, beneficent. If Esther is at last able to salvage her identity from under the thumb of those who would imprint upon her, her own representations of experience and of others are not free of her own smudging fingerprints. Like the vampire Voles, who, quote, smears the glass with his black glove to make it clearer, and whose fingers are in fact encased inside a, quote, dead glove, which scarcely seems to have any hand in it, Esther's narratological perspective is one concomitantly marked by self-deprecatory disavowals of her authorial hand, as well as ineluctably adulterated by it. So it is that in Esther's narrative and throughout the novel, the world of Bleak House is one that is thoroughly inked, not only by traces of the hands, handwriting, and handkerchief that suffuse it, but by the complicit, the inked and bloodied hands of its creators. Drenched in, quote, a wilderness marked with a rain of ink, the view of England through the surface of the page is one that looks out upon a view in Indian ink. Its viscosity in equal parts murky black blots as tainted blood, London is a city that is not yet dried upon the page, and consequently that provides more than enough freshly inked fodder for the liquid diet of Voles and his predaceous ilk, whose, quote, digestion is much impaired when it comes to solid food. Furthermore, if writing is akin not only to semantic custody, but to ingestion, then the distinction between the vital fluids of the novel and those of the body is moot. Hence, with a prick of her pen, a narrative sleight of hand, Esther is able to draw both blood and ink from Caddy's own punctured hands. She was clumsy enough with her needle, poor girl, and pricked her fingers as much as she had used to ink them, writes Esther. Indeed, it is quite as though the point of Esther's pen, her ravenous little pen, points to the malleability of the characters she materializes in ink, and thereby testifies to the authority she exercises over them, supplanting ink for blood in a blot transfusion that parasitically invests bodies as the parasites of sign, symbol, and allegory. As allegory is a method of naming that confuses subject and object, consciousness and matter, and suggests man's loss of his proper right to language, so Esther sentences her godchild, significantly, poignantly, also called Esther, to a living death as sign. In reading this sign of herself, necessarily deaf, mute, and spectral as any author's creation, Esther enacts a consumptive colonization of the baby as she reads in the, quote, curious little dark veins in its face and curious little dark marks under its eyes, the faint remembrance of poor Caddy's inky days, the inexorable traces of Esther's own authorial hand. Accordingly, when the third-person narrator of Bleak House queries, what connection can there be between the place in Lincolnshire, the house in town, the mercury and powder, and the whereabouts of Joe the outlaw with the broom, who had that distant ray of light upon him when he swept the churchyard step? What connection can there have been between many people and the innumerable histories of this world, who from opposite sides of great gulfs have nevertheless been very curiously brought together? The narrator is essentially instilling in us a bloodlust, calling us to read voraciously and to pursue the, quote, narrow track of blood, connecting peripheral narrative figures, and joining us to enlist a parasitism that dismembers bodies as hands and faces, and remembers vessels as signs and allegories of narrative significance and semiopoetic, if not semiopathic, utility. However, because Dickens's Gothic recognition is that in the modern world, urban community is even more an illusion than rural isolation, to incorporate bodies as illusion and ingest them as allegory is necessarily to fall back on fairy tales of speciously legible order and system. We are ineluctably drawn in by the, quote, dreadful attraction of a vampirizing process that leaches out solidity and supplants signs of darkly inked shadow. As Miller notes, we, along with many of the characters, are summoned to be cryptographers, a profession that virtually locates us within the vampire's crypt itself. And if we are indeed the ravenous ciphers of cryptograms and signs, then taking the singular superficies, the romantic side, the subjective face, or the surface of a mirror, for essence, is a parasitic act of siphoning substance, carving cavities, and making ourselves, like voles, voracious holes. Bleak House presents a world whose texture of grime and excrescence is textual, whose blotches and spots must be translated to be traversed. It is a text which self-consciously asks, do words disclose the length, breadth, depth of the object, or if not, what do they hide? Decrypting, meaning, turns out to be the work of a vampiric pathology, in which hands are read as bloodlines and the body is a text ripe for consumption. The end.
Great, thank you very much. All right, and on to
I miss
last.
laughter and hand claps. I have to take the mute off and do that. It's weird, right?
Right, and just go into sign language as we can.
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you very much. And now we are on to our last presenter.
Okay, I am Wakito Dreher, Associate Professor of English at the University of Nebraska. I am also a UCR alumnus, so very happy to see my my people here. So the name of my presentation is I'm Sick of Being Interrupted, The Passing for White by Ruby Baptiste and Misha Green's supernatural horror series, Lovecraft Country. I just wanted to say this is a work in progress where I just put some of my thoughts on the paper about it because it is so very much involved. This whole Lovecraft Country series itself is so very, very involved. It's deep, the levels of it. And even what I have peeled apart here, it's just so much more. So I'll just begin. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, yeah, all right. So at her performance at the White House in 1999, The late entertainer Della Reese gave her perspective on the blues. She said, when you hear someone sing the blues, it is the deepest and truest expression of the soul. Ruby Baptiste, played by Nigerian-born British actress Wunmi Musaku, is the mesmerizing, talented blues singer, guitarist in Misha Green's HBO creation Lovecraft Country. Her blues performances make possible for communal joy and expression in the Black neighborhood on the South Side of Chicago. Lovecraft Country is set in 1950s Jim Crow era. Racism and its ghosts in the basement, zombie, police, and race, and are embedded in supernatural beasts. And all of these undermine Ruby's gift to the community, as we shall see. Sick of being interrupted by racism and its prescriptions, she abandons her artistic expression to attend her urgent psychological and emotional desire to access whiteness via employment behind the counter of Marshall Fields. William, or Blue Eyes at the end of the bar, approaches Ruby after her lackluster performance in the Denmark VC bar. Ruby accepts his strategy to facilitate her employment at Marshall Fields. What follows is a grotesque, almost unbearable rendering of body horror that transforms Ruby into a white woman, Hilary Davenport. Now, this paper explores what happens to Black women's artistic expression when she is sick of being interrupted by the horrors and traumas of racist practices during the Jim Crow era. I'm sick of being interrupted also answers the question, why can't a Black woman's artistic expression override and suffice for her survival when the demons and banshees of racism, so drawn in the series, threaten her every move? Ruby Baptiste is the older half-sister of Letitia Letty Lewis, played by Jernee Smollett. Ruby has grounded her artistic life through the club system in the South Side of Chicago. Audiences first meet Ruby singing "I Want a Tall Skinny Papa," a blues song made popular by the African-American blues singer Sister Rosetta Sharp. The Denmark VC bar is the venue named for the leader who planned a major slave revolt called the Rising in Charleston, South Carolina in 1822. Ruby is accompanied by a six-piece band and accompanies herself with her guitar. Okay, I don't know why this is happening.
The sound's kind of scrambled, but I can read.
Is it? I don't know what.
It's just looks like buffering issues. It might be a Wi-Fi connection.
Okay, I'm so sorry, but okay, so I can just stop it here. So so note the the call and response of the crowd. Here we see Ruby immersed in her talent, and that talent she gives back to the community, and they consume the same, but also give some of themselves back to her. Now her sister Letty appears. Okay, so so what we see here, when a Letty appears on stage, it configures their sisterhood after neither sister has sang together since church days. But the lyrics to the song sung by Ruby and Letty not only signify sex and seduction or finding the ding dong, they are metaphors for the bringing together not only family, but of friends. Here, food in the lyrics plays a major role because after the making and baking and shaking, nothing but cake and pie or sweetness come out of the oven. The "come on, baby, come on" is more or less a conjure for Atticus Tick Freeman, played here by Jonathan Majors, to come over into the community after having been gone for so long. When he turns on the fire hydrant, the water from it bathes him within the community. Ruby and Letty's singing, as well as their flirtatious dancing, serenades his immersion as he holds up the Black girls and flings them around in the community. So the next scene that we are going to see here is when she is singing at Letty's house. And this is taking a long time. It's just buffering for some reason. So Ruby and her band are the entertainment for Letty's house party. And you see Ruby is dressed in red and she encourages the guests. She encourages the guests to boogie one more time again. And so again, we witness the joy she has singing in the company of her people.
Thank you for bringing all this.
Oh, okay. All right. So as the season progresses, so you see how Ruby is very happy. She's immersed in her community. There's a call and response in her community. There is so much joy on her face. And as the season progresses, Ruby makes known her real heart's desire. And that is to be a sales clerk at Marshall Fields. When we see this next scene, we are definitely taken in by the seductive. Don't tell me that. Okay. We see why Ruby is seduced by Marshall Fields. The gold chandeliers, the stairways, and the spacious floors filled with the latest in retail. These all fuel Ruby's main desire to be a sales clerk here. So you see what I was talking about, Matt, with this buffering.
Yeah, it could be a combination of multiple things, just Wi-Fi connection, the age of your laptop, and it's almost always our internet connections.
Okay.
Money. I got money. All my life I had to grind and hustle. I had to work like Kobe just to shine like Russell. They say, glad you made it happen overnight. They say, damn, you changed. I'm like, show you right. I got money.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can I help you with something? I'm just browsing. Let me know if you need anything. Did you just start working here? Yes. Yesterday, in fact. Do you shop here often? No, I didn't realize this store was hiring color girls. I know. I applied on a whim. Can't believe I actually got it.
Okay, so what is remarkable here is Musaka's remarkable interpretation of Ruby's disappointment. She clearly marks out the heartbreak of not following her heart's desire. She delayed going in, making the application. And she knows that if one clerk has been hired, Marshall Field is not going to get another hire. It's only going to be that one. So what she does is she uses her her voice to try and make out to play out this disappointment. And she's singing the chain gang blues here, dressed in sequins. And interesting in this scene is that Ruby is alone without her band. And so if you listen to the lyrics, this song is to serve as an expression of her trial at Marshall Fields earlier that morning. Okay. And when you're listening to this, you will see that it's
Well, fuck you too. No, I can't afford it, nothing.
Man, Blue Eyes at the end of the bar has your tax tonight.
okay. So you can see that the applause is barely audible. And this time she tells her patrons, who are the members in her community, well, fuck you too, for not appreciating what she has given to them and for not providing any kind of sustenance to alleviate her pain for the day. And notice how hard it was for her to get the song out. The stress it was to sing the lyrics. Also notice the lighting here, the smoky atmosphere. This entire atmosphere here, they are filled with the people who were with her at the block party at Denmark, BC. But these people are not listening to her. So there's no call and response here. And that leaves the portal open for Blue Eyes at the end of the bar to come in and make a deal. And the deal is a devil's deal, really, where she can have anything that she wants. And she gets to take this elixir, and we're going to see this later. So when she's at the bar, what is very interesting is that the art of storytelling here, when she tells the story how she didn't get the job to old Blue Eyes, so she doesn't get anyone to listen to her while she's on stage singing her blues, right? And her patrons do not offer her anything. Her storytelling to Blue Eyes allows for her to lay out her frustrations and fears. And here with him, the spell is indeed cast. The spell is indeed cast. So for Ruby, being accepted in her community is a given, but in the outside world, the monster of racism interrupts her every move. And as we see through Ruby in the Marshall Fields, the monsters cause quite a trauma that inevitably she can find no relief, no consolation, not even from one's own art. And as a result of that, she abandons her blues performance to attend her urgent psychological and emotional desire to access whiteness. This urgency causes trauma to Ruby's Black body, whereby she can access whiteness, but it has to be through a horrendous transformation into a white woman. It is indeed a devil's bargain here. Okay, so in episode 5, Ruben is given an elixir of choice that's the card that will allow her to do whatever she wants to do in whatever skin she is in. But when she parades that skin within her own community, her presence almost causes a Black male teenager to be beaten. And here she is being awakened as a white woman here. She's scared. She doesn't know what to do. And so we'll see what happens here. And pay attention to the score here, the music score.
Wake up, Ruby. Wake up.
Okay, so I'm just gonna move it through. In this scene here, she goes back to where she knows the downtown with Black people, and she bumps into this Black boy, and she almost gets him beaten until she tells the policeman, he didn't do anything to me. This next scene that we are seeing here is that even though Ruby is told by Blue Eyes that she can do whatever the fuck she wants with this elixir that she has here, not once does Ruby call for her artistry in singing here. And what is very interesting in this particular scene is that she's in the company of her white peers from Marshall Field, and they're slumming here in this club. She witnesses her white counterparts enjoying the pleasure of Black masculinity through the dance, knowing full well that outside of that space, every Black male in the dance hall would be beaten and, more radical, lynched if seen consorting with the white females there. Furthermore, the joy and pleasure she once gave as Black Ruby in the Denmark VC is not there. It is obliterated by her white femaleness. And such is the trauma of that reality in her world as White Ruby, she decides to let go of the elixir and reinvent in her Black body. But excavating her Black body from white flesh is a horrific process. The white flesh is sloughed off, as we shall see, as would a butcher cut off the fat of meat. Ruby emerges as a bloodied brown body that suggests a monstrosity of Black femaleness.
Mambo.
You've hit time, so if you want to wrap it up.
I'll be right behind.
So yes, Ruby can do whatever the fuck she wants in that white skin of femaleness. But not once does Ruby call for her artistry in singing and working with her instrument, the guitar. She doesn't ask for full access into the world of blues music and performances. That, as I remind you, Della Reese says, is the deepest and truest expression of the soul. But Ruby is tired of singing the blues. And such is her urgent desire for lush whiteness and its lush existence she feels it carries, that inhabiting whiteness seemingly casts off the blues, and she therefore does not have to sing them anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. I'm going to open the floor then to questions for any or all of our panelists. We have about 13 minutes before the technical end of our panel. So
I'm a little overwhelmed by that last scene.
Yeah.
And Wakita, let me ask you this. And I haven't watched Lovecraft Country, so I don't have any context for it. So she doesn't sing while she's white, right? So
and no more when she's black.
Oh, when she goes back to being black, she doesn't do it anymore. Okay.
That's the interesting thing about the whole thing. I mean, it doesn't happen that she's working at Marshall Fields as Hillary Davenport, you know, the white woman, you know, she's passing, right, for white. But when she goes, that's the question that I had. Why don't you go back to your artistry? Because what we're when we read about artists and their work, you know, the common sense notion about that is it saves you. You know, Alice Walker says, if I didn't write, I would kill myself, you know.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So art is supposed to save us from these demons and the like, but she doesn't go back to it. And so she's so consumed by this desire that I'm just puzzled as to why the writers did not give her that out. You know, she doesn't ask for a venue to sing. She doesn't ask for, hey, get me in such a way where I can be that singer.
You mean while she's white?
Yes.
Okay. And I mean
also, you know, you're right, exactly. And then also, why not blackness, black femaleness, artistry?
Right. Is it not implied that, I mean, that's the deal she makes with the devil, that she gives him her voice? No? What does she give him for this potion?
Well, she goes to bed with William. She says in the bar when he's talking to her, she's like, I know white boys who's always tried to come on to me and want to make me a kept woman. And he's saying, no, I'm trying to tell you that's not it. And she says, well, I know white boys who come along who just want to sleep with me. And he says, no, that's not it either. So they talk. Next scene, cut, they're going to bed together, right? And he leaves her on the counter. He leaves on the counter for her this whole wad of money and this elixir that she can take. Because she knows she wants whiteness. It's not, her art does not even enter into that conversation.
So the Faustian bargain, or maybe there's something more if there's a second season, but the Faustian bargain is only, so far we know, just sex, right? That's all we have on the table for the Faustian bargain. But there could be something outside of that in the next season.
I see Lilith shaking her head. What do you say? What are you saying? What are you seeing here?
Well, I haven't seen the adaptation, but definitely in the book, it's much more than that, because from Blue Eye's side, he wants in to seduce Letitia, not for sexual ways, but in more plot-driven ways. And I think for Ruby, it's so much more complex.
It is. It's so for Ruby, it's so much more complex than that. But sex is used to seal the deal. He and it's see in that whole thing with him leaving her that wad of money, and it's this thick with the elixir. It's to me. It's, but I don't know if it's that pat. It signals for me prostitution, because you pay prostitutes right at the end of the deal. Okay, so he paid her, but he also gives her what she knows she wants, and that is whiteness. And it's not predicated on the sex part. I think Ruby is feeling so distraught over what happened at Marshall's Fields, over what didn't happen at in the club until now. I guess for me, I got it was well, so what the hell? Go ahead. Dude.
Well, I was going to say it has a lot to do with, we talk about markets and racialized capitalism, to borrow Boots Riley's idea of the term and how he explores it in Sorry to Bother You, which is a classic text on racial capitalism.
Yes,
but the block party is a non-commercial space. It's the commons. It's the commune. It's a post-scarcity utopian space with the fire hydrant and the commingling of water and being. And then you see, it's really a brilliant metaphor that there's all this blood and horror when she tears off the white skin, because that is the actual oppression of whiteness and white supremacy that sits on her like a second skin. And I thought that was a great extrapolation of a kind of Nella Larson passing as a science fiction extrapolation, where in passing is an elixir you drink, right? It's not just that you're light skin, it's that you can take this drink and it then changes and creates this outer skin. So I think there's something going on. It's the money with the elixir that is speaking to kind of racialized capitalism, right?
And that's a very good point, Matthew. And the other thing, you just brought something else up here that made me think about this, is that Ruby is dark skinned. She's rotund, right? And in our popular culture, those are the domestics, right?
And white culture too, right? She's beautiful. She's beautiful, but she's not light skinned. She's not slender. She's not white skin or not slender, so she doesn't play into the white ideal of beauty, right?
Exactly. And she can't pass.
Exactly. On top of that, exactly.
On top of that.
But
this elixir gives her this ability to shed that skin.
Yeah.
And it's painful.
Mm-hmm.
It's painful. Mm-hmm. Because she just can't walk. She can't walk the street and pass easily, as can Claire in Nella Larson's passing, right? She has to go through this grotesque, this pain. It's a crime. It's a heinous crime to her body to hold on to this. And there's a scene in, when she first gets to do it, where oh my God, the lushness of it. She served ice cream without any kind of, who are you? She can sit on the bench and just read her newspaper. It is lush, and the way it's lit, right? Filtered, where it's lush, it's beautiful. It is so calming. But what she has to do to get there, and there's other scene where she changes into white. We saw her changing back into her blackness. But when she's changing into whiteness, it is horrible. It's horrible. But you were going to say, Lilith?
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking that is so similar to Irene in Passing, the friend who doesn't pass normally, when she just falls into a cab when it's hot and she goes and has iced tea. And there's that similar moment of luxury. Yes. And she doesn't have to pass. She also has a life where she's part of the community.
Exactly. So,
but I think
I would say it makes sense that she doesn't do the blues, because when you have privilege, it's kind of like floating on the breeze. And I think Bong Joon-ho talks about this in Parasite in his interviews, is that there's just this kind of smooth gliding ability that when you're when you're living in a world of privilege, you don't really need the blues as much in your life, because you're just kind of coasting on this breeze that just carries you forth. And, the Black experience has deep highs and lows in American history because of the disproportionate level of art and culture that's been produced based on alienation and suffering. And I think that's my reasoning why she may not be doing the blues. She's just kind of coasting on that breeze of whiteness.
But when she is in the white body.
Yeah. Yeah,
when
when
she
she's in white.
gets, I'm just curious when she gets back to her blackness. Why doesn't she pick up her guitar? Because I kept
Maybe betrayal, maybe racial betrayal.
That could be. That's very good. Yes, I see your point. Yes, I see.
She's betrayed her community. I mean, we get this with Irene too, right? Or Nell Larson's Parsing is this feeling like I'm passing, but if I can pass, am I not in solidarity with the people who can't pass? That racial solidarity is similar to class solidarity.
Lilith, go ahead.
I think it is also about sister solidarity. So especially comparing it to Thelma Gordon, because they're another short story of passing, Pauline Hopkins, 1900, Thelma Gordon. There's this difficult relationship with her sister, and it's about a whole family. And I'm thinking about the texts that that came up earlier, like Marge Piercy and the female separatists. I wonder, Professor Dreyer, do you think that there's an element also of an inability to have that separate female sphere, that Ruby wants to communicate with Letitia and have this shared experience, but she realizes she can't, and there's a mourning and a loss?
I agree. I think, yeah, you just bringing up, all, like I said, it's just very, very layered. And, once it's algebraic, right? Once the equation moves to the other side of the equal sign, it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same. So I think she struggled. And I don't know if the writers, I'm gonna have to look at it again. I don't think the writers really fleshed that out in terms of, because I don't see any sense of betrayal. I don't see any sense of of shame, where I can't get back into it, into the community. It's just a very, this is just topical. I just wanted to explore it, to look at her joy when she is indeed in that community. But Matthew, as you brought out, there isn't an exchange. There is a social cultural exchange, but there isn't a capitalist exchange.
Mm-hmm.
She's doing it for the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
the block party is exactly
party
it.
and at
That's utopian space.
House,
yeah,
right. And she sings again at another part. I just I couldn't take myself to that trauma of trying to get to that one, to get to that scene.
Yeah.
But what happens when she sleeps with Blue Eyes, right? She does get that capitalist exchange.
Mm-hmm.
She gets the money, and she gets that elixir.
Yeah, yeah. And the access to other financial opportunities.
Yes,
from
there
that.
you go.
So
Right.
It's kind of like how white people, when you talk about race for profit in Kianga Yamada Taylor's book about redlining and all that, but like that, if you're white, you're able to intergenerationally move money down. It's like a down payment she's getting. She's getting a down payment to whiteness. Yeah, she's getting a down payment to whiteness.
That's such an appropriate comparison, because Letitia has bought this haunted house and at a discount, and that really is a down payment to access to this white world.
Absolutely.
And even there's whiteness in that transaction as well. They find out later
Mm-hmm.
that it's the blonde, the platinum blonde woman who made that possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That the mother didn't have the money to give the sisters, as Ruby thinks.
Well,
all right, I'm going to actually interrupt.
Oh, we're out of time, huh? Yeah, right.
Yeah, we've hit time, but I know that Kate has a question for Marina. So if you're willing to stick around and continue discussion, that would be awesome. But I understand if there's, an immediate need to flee. But I'm not going anywhere yet. So if Marina's up for answering a question.
Sure, I can tackle one.
I would like to thank all three of you. I think all three papers were really interesting. I need now to watch Lovecraft Country and watch Wall-E, which I've actually never seen. But my question's for Marina.
Yeah.
When you say vampire, everybody thinks Dracula, which is of course written 2 decades after Bleak House.
Mm-hmm.
So if Dickens is going to have access to the vampire myth, it's going to be something more like Polidori, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if there's any documentation of what he had read. and I'll throw this out here. I don't know if it's of any use to you at any point. A million years ago, I worked on a short project, Dickens' Cricket in the Hearth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I read as being very reminiscent of Frankenstein. And it's so long ago, I can't remember any of the details, but at the time there were 100 of them. And it seemed like a very compelling argument.
So they're like proto-texts, kind of like, they're before the actual mega text.
Right. Well, but I mean, he could have actually read Frankenstein before writing Cricket.
Oh yeah, that I was thinking of the Dracula. I was thinking of that too. Yeah.
Right, but there were other vampire texts before Dracula. And so I'm wondering, and this is certainly not how we think of Dickens, this sort of Gothic subtext, which I think you bring out in Bleak House with a lot of really delicious examples. I guess I wanted to throw out that Cricket in the Hearth might allow you to pursue the Gothic element or the horror element a little further.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think you can find, especially with the Gothic cityscape is ripe and rife within Dickens's, work. He did publish within his Household Words in 1871 a treatise on vampires and ghouls, and the word vampire comes up in Bleak House quite a bit. So he definitely had, some at least some familiarity with it. I'm not quite sure exactly what text, so to speak, he might have read in particular, but that's very interesting. I'm definitely going to check into that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of the elder Dumas, who actually took one of the vampire stories from a German I can't remember his name of, but he actually dramatized the story in 1852.
Yeah.
As Le Vampire. And there's also Varney the Vampire,
right?
In those, like, so right there, as Bleak House is being constructed, like there's this kind of crux of it.
It's there. It's just not Dracula or Carmilla, which I think comes out a year later.
Yeah, Carmilla was 72.
Yeah. But it's a nice parallel and one that makes it richer.
It's nice too, because I read Bleak. I'm not a Victorianist, but for my undergraduate, I read Bleak House and loved it. It was the first real Dickens text I read, and I can see the thematic component of that with the vampire in that narrative. It really is conducive for that kind of reading.
Yeah, it's interesting too, like I don't know, in sort of modern parlance, right, or contemporary, we tend to, I guess these idioms and metaphors of judicial systems and lawyers and, particular being vampires, and here's Dickens' text from the 1800s, playing on those same motifs and this monstrous court of chancery. And I was thinking with your paper too, Matthew, that when you're talking about like these systems of technology and sort of the modern city and how we're constructing, I guess, this behemoth, this monster out of the technology. And yet in Bleak House, as I was reading my own paper, I'm thinking, oh, here are all these parallels to what you were talking about, not so much maybe from this electro-futurist potential, but within legal writings and within the written word and the way that we're constructing the modern infrastructure of a city. And it's just, it's embedded in that too, this sort of dismay at what humans are constructing and the webs that we're weaving for ourselves, whether it's out of nanobytes and technology or whether it's with our pens,
Yeah, we've had centuries of this where we have this immediate euphoric rush of this new industrialized technology or a series of industrial movements, and then it quickly gets gobbled up by the people that already have power. And you're like, okay, well, it didn't liberate us. We thought, like Barlow was a right libertarian and thinker about the internet. He thought we wouldn't need democracy and government or anything. It's like, well, that didn't work out. Multinationals took over. And so, it is a kind of trend. And you're right. Dickens is writing in the periods of industrialization, in the periods of Marx, and you're seeing the vampire tendencies of capital itself on the lives of workers in Bleak House.
Yeah. Very much.
I mean, actually, Marx uses the phrase that profit is dead labor sucked out of the bodies of the workers.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so that's actually there's a beautiful phrase from Das Kapital, which is talking about like actually the vampire coming in with the teeth, and that profit is floating around as the memories of dead labor. You know, like the blood. It's like, wow. Okay, Marx, you got it right. So I think I do like that. I mean, I've never really thought about Bleak House and the frame metaphor of vampires. So I enjoyed that.
I did too. Yeah, I did too.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody also for the fantastic presentations and leaving on the very disturbing image. Bodies peeling.
I'm going to take a very slow shower tonight.
Well, I did before we go. I just wanted to ask Matthews, what is Squid Games? What is your thought?
You know, I've been
capitalism and
I've been so busy. I've only seen the first episode. I'm usually busy this quarter, but it's definitely something I want to finish. And I think it's interesting because Bong Joon-ho, when he was traveling with Parasite, which is, fantastic, one of the greatest films ever made, he said when he traveled all over the world, what he found out is that it moved everybody in similar and different ways, but at the core, very same ways. And he realized that we all live in one country, and that country is capitalism. That's why, and there's lots of really weird financial instruments in the way that housing functions in Korea that speaks to the Squid Game and debt. And, and this is what I think people forget. And this is what Marx gets wrong, is that it wasn't the labor power of slaves that was what they cared about. It was the slaves as debt assets. And the history of struggle is actually about debt, not just labor and capital, like profit. It's actually about debt. David Graeber has a great book called Debt: A 5,000-Year History. And it was the power of slaves as debt assets to be traded. When Thomas Jefferson was bankrupt and died, that was the way you got rid of your debt, is you sold off your slaves, right? And this notion of debt hasn't really left our conversation. In fact, it's even more visualized now in terms of credit card debt, student debt, all kinds of different types of debt. And we haven't had that jubilee.
What was the name of that book? 5,000 years of what?
It's called Debt: A 5,000-Year History by David Graeber, Graeber. Probably the most important thinker for me in the 21st century. He died of COVID, unfortunately, but a really beautiful book. Yeah, he died of complications of COVID. It said Graeber, Graeber, a Jewish dissident intellectual from Brooklyn. Yeah, great.
Great. Okay.
Well, so good to see all of you.
Well, so much.
Fantastic.
Yes,
it was
you,
a lot
everyone.
of fun. This is like the most intellectual Zoom conversation I've ever had. I loved it.
That's for sure.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank
you,
you,
Kate. And thank you, Megan, for getting us all
Megan.
here.
Thank you, Megan. Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. See you
everyone.
next year.